This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
The Communist Party of China celebrates its 100-year anniversary this year, having had many significant achievements over the last century. The CPC has been central to China's extraordinary development over the last 100 years, including creating a participatory form of governance driven by people-centered policies. The CPC has also enabled the country to grow into the world's second-largest economy and the first developing country to achieve the United Nations Sustainable Development Goal on poverty eradication. In addition to its domestic achievements, China's policy of reform and opening up has led to a strengthening of bilateral relationships. China has partnered with African countries in many areas. One of the most visible has been in building bridges, roads and railways across the continent to aid in Africa's infrastructural development. On this special edition of the program, we look at some of the achievements of the Communist Party of China over the last century and how China's relationship with Africa has continued to strengthen over time. I'm Beatrice Marshall. Welcome to Talk Africa. While bilateral relations with Kenya date back to 1963, when China became one of the first countries to open an embassy in Nairobi. We sat down with the Secretary General of Kenya's governing Jubilee Party, the Honorable Raphael Tuju, to talk about how CPC policies have shaped modern-day China and what lessons we can learn from their political leadership. Honorable Tuju, thank you very much for your time. Now, China is set to mark 100 years since the Communist Party of China was established. I want to hear your perspective on this. What does it mean for a political party to be in existence for 100 years?
Well, first thing, I'd like to congratulate the Chinese Communist Party for the amazing transformation that they have been able to make in that country. My congratulations to the party and my congratulations to the people of China, and my congratulations to Secretary General President Xi Jinping for the very amazing transformation that that country has undergone under the Communist Party. But I can just give a very interesting, simple example. In 1973, and that is within my lifetime, the tallest building in Kenya, the KICC, was taller than the tallest building in China. KICC was 28 stories. The tallest building in China at that time was 22 stories. Today, I think the tallest building in China is 100 and something, I don't know, maybe 120, 130, even more stories. And the cities are completely different and completely developed. And I don't think we've reached another building which is more than 45. We hope that there should be some 2 buildings which are 45 stories built by the Chinese in Kenya.
But you're talking about this huge development. I mean, and you're also talking about how the development of China in the 70s, almost at par with the development of countries in Africa in the 1970s. But today, China is the world's second largest economy. I want you to reflect on this for us, particularly on the aspect of political parties driving and delivering on development.
There's a big lesson for us to learn from China. For many years, our point of reference has been the Western world and Western democracies. For example, the American democracies. Look at the human development aspect. In 1978, the GDP per capita of Kenyans was double that one of the GDP of China. But the Chinese party, with its very people-centered development agenda, look at where they are today. Their GDP per capita is more than 33 times that of Kenya in a lifetime. 1978, I was in high school. So really, if you look at just how they've transformed that country, we call it the Chinese miracle because there's no precedent in the history of mankind where there's been such a transformation of so many people making the transition from abject poverty to the affluence that now you see in China.
What do you attribute this to? What do you see as the issue that has made the single most impression and made this turnaround for China possible?
The political party has everything to do with it. And the path they took of a people-centered socialist philosophy has made a big difference. Leadership is everything also. And if you look, for example, in the United States, you get, say, people sometimes becoming president because they're the richest people in that particular country. That will not happen in China. China, the people who get to be leaders are not the richest people. The people who get to be leaders are those who have exhibited a record and a career of service to the people. So it's a completely different philosophical standpoint.
You're talking about leadership as being central, whether it is mostly being political leadership. And we've seen a lot of transformation in China under the CPC. What lessons do you think African countries, sub-Saharan African countries can borrow, even though we're not comparing here, but what lessons can be borrowed particularly on political leadership?
I think in political leadership we have to embrace at least some of the socialist policies that the Chinese have, which is people-centered, universal health, for example. Education is very important. There is no civilization which has made that kind of transformation without a critical number of the population being literate and numerate. Now, the Chinese transition right now from primary school to high school to post-high school education for the last 40 to 50 years has been phenomenal, is almost 100%. Now, when you compare that with, say, for example, where I come from in Siaya or Kitui, for example, transition from primary school to university is between 10 and 15%. Compare that with over 90% in a place like China and, of course, most of the Southeast Asian countries. So that's why, you know, for example, in this country today, in Kenya, we are very delighted that we've been able to make that transformation for the first time in this Jubilee government. The last 2 or 3 years, we've been able to push the transition from primary to secondary education from where it was between 35 and 45 just 10 years ago to what it is now, over 90%. Because education is very, very important in human development.
So I want to look at your party, Kenya's ruling Jubilee party here, because I know that there have been collaboration between the ruling Jubilee party and the CPC of China. How is that collaboration? What is it you're doing with the cooperation?
We were doing quite a bit before the advent of COVID-19. We used to have a lot of exchange visits. We had several visits a year, maybe 3 or 4 visits per year. But with the COVID-19 protocols kicking in, then that has completely disrupted the number of visits that you would want to do with China. So those exchange visits are important, and indeed it is currently my intention that when we do another exchange visit, I would not just have members of Jubilee Party to go. I'll have members of other parties, including parties who are supposed to be in opposition. We'll want them to go and see what the Communist Party of China has done in terms of uniting the country. You know, they are way ahead of us as far as that is concerned, because part of the challenges that we face, which is very serious in these countries, how do we make Kenyans to have a sense of belonging as Kenyans? And we are only 47, maybe 50 million people. Compare that with a country with so much diversity as China, so huge, more than 1.4 billion people, and they are more united than we are here. It's a shame on us, really, and we should learn and, copy the examples of China and the Communist Party of China, how they have brought the country together.
What do you think are some of the critical lessons that political parties in Kenya could take from the CPC?
One, of course, is focus, and another one, of course, is a fight against corruption, because corruption is a very insidious cancer and very destructive. I think the Chinese have been very ruthless in the way they deal with corruption, and I think that's a lesson that we should be able to take from there. There are other lessons, just discipline within the party. And you cannot have discipline within the party if you don't have discipline in the country. Some of these are probably even cultural, but I believe that we can teach our young people to go towards that direction. The world is increasingly interconnected, and I think that there are areas in which we can learn a lot from, the Chinese. I was looking at, just the way the school children brought up and taught in schools in China. There are quite a few lessons that we should be able to learn from those practices, so that our young people can also grow to know that they're Kenyans first before they're small ethnic groups. I think you and I are aware of areas of the country where sometimes kids are encouraged not to go to school so that they can go for circumcision first. And when they come from those circumcision, then they're too big to be taught by female teachers. We have a myriad, we have serious problems because of the diversity we have. But it is the leadership that can bring the country together. And we do have examples. Look at Tanzania. Can't be done. Tanzania has more tribes than what we have in Kenya. And somehow, with the example that they tried to get from China by the late Mwalimu Nyerere, they may have other problems, but they don't have the challenge of management of ethnic diversity that we have in this country.
So I want to look very briefly ahead, because the Communist Party of China has prioritized, ideas such as peaceful development and shared prosperity of all mankind. 100 years on, China is now a great power. How do you see ideologies such as this shaping the future for mankind, particularly making it a more peaceful, continent or peaceful world for all of us?
Well, first of all, just as I congratulate China, I also challenge China. To be the biggest economy in the world comes with a lot of responsibility. To be the biggest economy in the world also comes with a lot of jealousy from those countries which were at the top of the patch before. And all of a sudden, China has not just sneaked in, but they have overtaken so many people. So that can generate a lot of jealousies. So I think the biggest challenge that China has at the moment is how do they manage their new found power? How do they manage their new found economic superiority? How do they manage the sheer numbers that they have? And in fact, I say thank God for China, because if they were as aggressive as some of the smaller countries which have been rich and who have been powerful before, I think the world would be turned upside down. I think they are giants, but they are gentle giants, and I'm hopeful that they'll be able to rise to the pedestal in which they can help bring the rest of the world to their level. So I think that that philosophy of the Chinese Communist Party, of how they engage with the rest of the world in a very constructive way, I think is something that we appreciate. And we appreciate their position in the United Nations Security Council, because they tend to be the voice that the rest of the less developed countries are able to rely on.
So on the 100th anniversary of the China's Communist Party, what is your message?
My message is to congratulate them, and my message to them is that we are looking at them as a beacon, as the party to inspire the rest of us. So they cannot afford to fail, and we cannot allow them to think that they can afford to fail, because when they fail, then we have nobody to look up to.
Honorable Tuju, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And joining us now to take a deeper look at how the Communist Party of China has achieved such outstanding successes over the last century, Dr. David Monyai, the director of the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg, and Professor Lina Ben-Abdallah, assistant professor of politics at Wake Forest University in North Carolina. Thank you both for joining us on the program, and welcome to Talk Africa. Now, Dr. Monyai, let's start off with your thoughts on this, because China is marking 100 years since the Communist Party of China was established in 1921. Many would say 100 years is a pretty long time for a party. What has made the CPC last this long? How is it that the CPC has managed to achieve over the last 100 years?
Well, thank you. I think the very first starting point is for us to congratulate the senior leadership of the China Communist Party, as well as the ordinary members and the entire country for this great achievement for 100 years. I think what stands out for me, the factor number one is people, that from the beginning, the China Communist Party managed to rely and depend and work closely with the people on the ground. And if you look throughout in terms of the programs that they enacted, as well as policies when they came into power in 1949, they have always been people-centered. Let's go back in the beginning, 1921. I think China, like our own continent, Africa, had a number of colonial interventions, I think like us here in Africa, but they managed to unite the Chinese people against, firstly, the Japanese expansion and imperialism, as well as to deal with elements among themselves, the nationalists, the Long March, uniting people, even though without massive support from the international community. They managed to really fight superior weapons and ideas coming from outside, based on unity of the Chinese people.
Professor Ben-Abdallah, so we do see that the CPC has been central to the development of China, which is now the world's second largest economy and the first developing country to achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals on poverty. Reflect on this for us, particularly on the aspect of political parties as drivers of development.
I mean, and you're right, by some statistics, in 1978, the percentage of Chinese population that was living under extreme poverty was 90. So we're talking about 90%. We fast forward to the year 2014, estimates reduce that number to less than 1%. And so, I mean, this by any measure, no matter what the definition of the line or the threshold for extreme poverty is, this is a massive success. This is a miracle. And it becomes a place where countries in the developing world and across the global south are interested in knowing about this experience and how is it possible for taking 35 to 40 years to turn things around that hugely. And, a lot of it is this basically this state-led centralized development model, where essentially party officials are in charge of planning development over a number of years, and as in consultation with the people and in putting people at the center of the policies. And so economic development, economic growth, poverty reduction have been very central to the mission of the CPC over the last few decades.
So, Professor Ben Abdallah, of course, there are learning points for other societies, particularly, as you point out, in the global south, because China's development under the CPC is seen through even the exchanges with other political parties across the global south particularly. So what lessons, talk to us about those lessons that you mentioned, what lessons can be learned from China in terms of building parties, particularly for Africa, let's say?
There is an aspiration everywhere you go in the developing world and the global south to achieve levels of development, levels of economic success, to provide better life for the citizens, for populations, for families, and so on. So these ideals for development are shared ideals, no matter how different the regimes or the states are we're talking about. And in terms of African countries and elites' relationships to China and to the CPC, we have seen over the past few decades an increasing desire and willingness to communicate with the CPC and to engage in exchanges, in party-to-party exchanges, in order to learn these best practices on how to structure, government models that are going to prioritize development and economic growth. The lessons that we have time and time again seen is precisely putting development at the center of governance, putting economic growth at the center of governance, prioritizing development, creating jobs, fighting poverty, providing infrastructure, drinking water, providing the basic infrastructure needs for people to essentially access education, access jobs, access health, which are all very important aspects that to varying degrees are not still achieved across the African continent.
Right. Dr. Munyai, I want to look at those shared ideals that Professor Ben Abdallah has talked about, because if there is one continent that has been very close to China since the end of colonialism, it is Africa. And the People's Republic of China was long kept out of the United Nations after its founding in 1949. And in the 1960s, China received a lot of support from newly independent African states. Talk to us about the political choices and the shared ideals that China and Africa have had, and how Africa's political choices have tied in with China over the last 60 years, post-colonialism.
I think there's a lot of lessons that we have learned. The beginning of the relation between Africa and China, I think, goes as far back as 1955 at the Bandung Conference in Indonesia, where Africans and Asians met and discussed a number of issues that confronted the people in these areas. What were those issues? I think it had to do with the post-1945 world order that was led by the United States and Western countries. That within that world order, the developing countries were excluded in institutions that are, for instance, the IMF, World Bank, and Africans and Asians were not gaining more of technology transfer. There was less technological transfer, education and cultural, as well as trade, which was not in favor of these developing countries. And the coming of Chairman Mao in 1945 up to the 60s, Africans were always conscious of the struggles that the Chinese people confronted, and also wanted to help as much as China, which was a poor country at that time, helped a lot of countries, Algeria, up here in Tanzania and Zambia in the 70s with the Tazara Rail. And they contributed quite massively in helping Africans practically in terms of dealing with economic development, as well as assisting in fighting the remnants of colonial and foreign subjugation in terms of training liberation movements in Zimbabwe, in Angola, and quite a number of other areas on the African continent.
So, Professor Ben Abdallah, as China's Communist Party marks 100 years, what is your message as the CPC marks 100 years?
I think it's my message is probably academic in a way. I think it's important to understand that in these 100 years, the China-Africa relationship is the strong relationship we know today because of the past. And because there has been decades, as Professor Monnier and yourself have mentioned, the China-Africa relations and solidarity goes back all the way to the formation, both of the CPC and several revolutionary parties in the continent. And it's extremely important to understand that the strong relations we see today in China-Africa relations are due to a strong past and the strong relations. And so as China celebrates, or CCP celebrates 100 years, China-Africa relations do celebrate as well this long, deep connection between the continent and China.
All right. Dr. Munyai, your thoughts? What is your message as China's Communist Party marks 100 years?
I think the question of solidarity for the CPC to continue working closely with people, alleviating poverty, and ensuring that infrastructure is somehow shared in the country, improving the well-being of ordinary people on the ground through education, scientific breakthroughs, and the recent moves and breakthroughs in space, and how to then turn that around to ensure that it benefits everyone, not just in China, within Asia and in the developing world, and to bring about peace in the world. I think those are some of the messages that we would want to see. We, coming from Africa, are learning more. We're not going to copy everything from CPC. We have our own ideas. However, I think we have learned a great deal, particularly on anti-corruption, to ensure that there is discipline in government through the party directives, to ensure that that development is not only shared by few, but shared by the majority of people. And that will assist to bring a peaceful world.
All right, Dr. Munyai and Professor Ben Abdallah, to you both, thank you very much for being on the program today. And that's all we have time for this week. But a big thank you to my guests, Honorable Raphael Tuju, the Secretary General of Kenya's governing Jubilee Party, Dr. David Munyai, Director of the Center for Africa-China Studies at the University of Johannesburg, and Professor Lina Ben Abdallah, Assistant Professor of Politics at Wake Forest University in North Carolina. As we look forward to many more years of mutually beneficial relations between Africa and China, we extend our best wishes to the Communist Party of China on the occasion of their centenary celebrations. Remember, we'd love to hear your feedback through our social media handles on Facebook and Twitter. You can also catch the show on our YouTube playlist. And do keep the conversation going and tune in again next week for more Talk Africa. From me, Beatrice Marshall, and the team in Nairobi, stay safe and goodbye.